And that's where they come, battling.
Oh, what a grab! What a highlight! Ayomanor! Mind your manners, what a catch!
That'll make your SportsCenter top 10.
After that catch by Elic Ayomanor, should we even do a show after that? How do we top that? Well, we top that by bringing these two guys in. We got Mike in Toronto, we got Gord in Vancouver, and I'm Jim on Football Island as we give you the 2-minute offense. And let's start with Stanford, Colorado. Elic Ayomanor, 19 targets, 13 receptions, 294, and 3 tutties, including the heart-stopping one in overtime. He sets a Stanford all-time record for reception yards. Pitt pulls off the major upset against 17th-ranked Louisville, and Christian Bayou from Ottawa was at the controls, 200 yards passing, 2 TDs, and more importantly, no picks to keep that sheet clean. San Diego State over Hawaii, but for the Rainbow Warriors, Nick Senecal hits the century mark, and he also hits the promised land. It was a massacre for Penn State as Teo Johnson hauls in 2 TD passes and 66 yards on the day for those Nittany Lions. Tanner McLaughlin, his old reliable self, 4 receptions for 48 yards for Arizona as they wipe out Wazoo. Well, it was a great weekend for Canadians. It wasn't just Elic Ayomanor, but hey, we got to talk about this. He set a record for Stanford for receiving yards, and Stanford is a foundational team, and it was all in the second half. Mike, take us through that game for Elic Ayomanor.
Oh, man, like it's fun. Like, everybody's going to talk about the big catch. That wasn't the only big catch he made. He made a catch where he extended a drive where he was hit, 3 or 4 yards shy of the line of scrimmage and just kept fighting and leaning and got the first down. But that catch, it's crazy. And it's funny because your mind starts going places when you see something that you automatically think of. And when he made that catch, before he got to the end zone, I thought of the Ben Cahoon catch that he made against Saskatchewan a few years ago, where he reached around the defender's helmet to catch the football. The concentration, the skill level, the strength to make that kind of a catch is unbelievable. So, yeah, I think we've got a new calling card for this show for the rest of the year.
Well, and the thing about that catch is, who's he punking on that catch? None other than former #1 national recruit and one of the hottest names in college football after the first couple weeks, Travis Hunter, who, in fairness to Travis Hunter, was just returning from a pretty significant injury. This is his first game back and played both sides of the ball for most of the game. But that was one of the most impressive parts for me with Ayomanor's performance, was that the guy that he was stealing the lunch money of again and again and again was the most talented defensive back on the field on either team by far. And what was awesome about it is you get to the fourth quarter, and it got to the point where everybody in the building knew that the ball was going to be going to Ayomanor on a big play, and he was still making the plays anyway. And it was just incredible to watch. The guy went beast mode. He was feeling it, and he just kept making. He believed that he was going to make the play, and he just kept making it. He also showed off a wide variety of tricks here. He's got a big body frame. He was able to win physical, like DK Metcalf style receptions, but he also blew guys away. 97-yard house call in this game for him. Like, that shows explosiveness to go along with that size. And all of a sudden, like, I think just off the strength of this game, NFL scouts are all of a sudden going, whoa, like, we better be paying attention to this guy.
And, if you want to continue on this pace, what I loved about it is this was his coming out party for the national media, as you allude to, scouts taking a look. And it seems that everybody we've talked about over the last 2 years has that game where we kind of go, oh, he's been in the background, and then pow, whether it be Chase Claypool at Notre Dame or Chase Brown at Illinois or Chuba Hubbard at Oklahoma State. I mean, these guys would have that game. And now with Ayomanor, it's kind of an opportunity for the rest of the country and the rest of the United States now as well to kind of say, okay, this guy's on the map now. And boy, for him to do it against that team as well that's been in the spotlight all season long, I mean, what a great night for the kid, and I hope he has a lot more down the road.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about Ayomanor later in the show, but there were other Canadians that turned in some great performances, Mike.
Yeah, and we talked last week about Christian Veer, and he was kind of thrown to the lions. And here you start, just go up against Louisville. They're a top 20 team, and they've got a really good defense, and they're coming off an emotional win against Notre Dame. Go! And his numbers weren't great. He was under 50%. He was 200 even, but he threw a couple of touchdown passes, and maybe more importantly, didn't throw a pick in an upset win. And the 2 touchdown passes that he threw were both dimes. And the first one particularly, where he was basically standing at midfield and, just dropped it right in the bucket. I'm glad that he came out with a game like that, but to be honest, I didn't expect it. I thought it was going to be a long night. And in some instances it was, but when he needed the big play, he got it. And he didn't, the one thing he couldn't do was turn the ball over, and he didn't. So I thought it was a, check mark kind of game for him.
Yeah, agreed. Lots to build off in that performance from Veilleux. And, there were a couple other performances stood out to me. Nick Senecal continues to show that he's got some explosion. I don't know that the NFL is in his future, but I would say that's a name that I would mark for the future if you're a CFL fan, because I think he's a guy whose skill set will translate pretty well to the CFL. So that's a name down in Hawaii to watch for. And then there was an interesting game out west where you had a battle between Canadians on both sides. On the Boise State defense, you had Ty Benefield starting as a freshman. He had an excellent game, broke up a pass or two, made some really solid open field tackles. And then Newer Gakuth on the other side with Colorado State, who continued a pretty good run of form for him lately. He's been a consistently impactful guy for the Rams for the last month plus at this point in time, and continued chipping in another 5 tackles for him at TFL. Another good game on the defensive line. And if you haven't seen the ending to that game, you have to, because it was a classic college football ending. Colorado State winning on a Hail Mary with no time left on the clock. So go look that one up if you haven't seen that clip yet.
So who will we be looking up in our Stateside 5? In at 5, Teo Johnson with Penn State. 4 receptions, 66 yards, and 2 touchdown receptions. In at 4, Christian Veilleux vied well through the air in his first start for Pitt. 200 yards, found the end zone a couple of times in a major upset over Louisville. Third time in the 5 this year for Newer Gakuth of Colorado State. 5 tackles and a TFL. Hawaii's Nick Senecal sneaks in at 2, 3 receptions, 100 yards, and a trip to the promised land. And one of the greatest Canadian performances ever in the NCAA, Elic Ayomanor for Stanford with 13 receptions for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns, including that heart stopper in overtime against Colorado. When we come back, we'll go way up north. And welcome back to KGN, everyone. A big mix-up and a big shuffle in this week's Power 7. In at 7, the Saskatchewan Huskies. Yes, they may have lost twice to Alberta, but they look to be the number 2 team in the Canada West. Laval was shut out, and Laval will be punished in the Power 7 for it. The first shutout of Laval since 1996. They are the dark horses of Ontario. And number 5, they would be the Queen's Gales. This is the apex for Chris Morris over the last decade. The Alberta Golden Bears coming in at number 4. They are in control of their destiny in the C-Dub. Let's take a look at 3 and 2. Starting with 3, it's the Laurier Golden Hawks. The reason we pair them together is at number 2, the Western Mustangs. These two teams will face each other this weekend. And in at number 1, the most dominant team in U Sports, and they proved it last week against Laval, your Montreal Carabins. So there's your Power 7. It's really shuffled up. We said that this past weekend would break up the logjam, and it certainly did, Gord. What was the game that really stood out to you as maybe a shocker?
Oh, if you're going to set me up like that, then UBC Calgary is definitely the game that stands out as the shocker. That was just an absolute egg laid by UBC. And what's most unfortunate for them is that the out-of-town scoreboard went their way. Alberta wins against Saskatchewan, which had UBC held serve and beat a Calgary team that had not yet won this season, then UBC would have been back in the driver's seat for first place to control their destiny with a game in Edmonton in a couple weeks' time to seal it. And yet, instead, they trip over their own feet a little bit. And guys, like, not only did they lose this game, they got spanked in this game. Like, it was not competitive for most of the afternoon. Garrett Rooker looked off. I know he was spelled off by Derek Engel for a stretch. Isaiah Knight didn't play in this game, so that's an issue for UBC as well. But an offense that looked like nobody could slow them down as recently as a couple weeks ago, all of a sudden, arguably the worst defense, statistically the worst defense in the conference before this game, shut them down completely. UBC is going to have to go back to the drawing board on that side of the ball. Another one that I think was surprising just because of the spread of the scoreline was that Laval-Montreal game in Quebec that we were all watching very closely. You know, to have it be a 4-score game. I can't remember the last time Laval and Montreal played a 4-score game. And so that was a bit of a shock as well.
Yeah, the thing that surprised me, you know, the score in the Calgary game was surprising enough, but the fact that UBC couldn't get the offense going, and you know, Calgary, the fewest points they had allowed before this one in a game was 23. So you think, okay, the way that UBC can move the football, this is going to be, you know, a feast for them. And you know, the surprising, you know, outcome was one thing, but the way that it happened, I think, was even more surprising. And to follow up on Laval Montreal, Jim, we were talking about this last week. Would it be a rock fight or would it be a little bit more wide open? And I think we were both right because, you know, Montreal gets the offense and we had talked about their weapons and they delivered. And I expected a lower scoring game, but I didn't expect a goose egg. I mean, this was a surprise. So it's funny how you can expect or not be surprised by some aspects of a game, but then completely surprised by other aspects. But I don't think anybody saw Laval, you know, getting shut out. And, you know, I don't know if they should be number 6 on the Power 7. I don't know if Queen should be ranked above them, but that's another conversation we can have.
Well, and I think the other part of that conversation is that, in my opinion, Jonathan Senecal has all but sealed the heck Crichton with that performance this past weekend. He was far and away the best player on the field in that game. 2 touchdowns through the air, just under 300 yards, another 60-plus yards rushing, and a touchdown on the ground. He was the guy keying this Montreal attack as his defense did all the work on the other side of the ball, and they didn't even hand Laval 2 points, which I figured they would have done at least once in that game. So
55-0. That's the last time Laval was shut out. That was in 1996. They weren't even in U Sports then. They were a club team playing the University of Manitoba. That's how far you have to go back to find out when Laval was shut out. They were a developmental team. But let's take a look at that Queens team. Mike, you're a believer because you're of the opinion that Queens is really only about 3 plays away from being much further up the standings.
Yeah, but they didn't make those plays, and I think, you know, we have to come into some sort of realism there. They had Western. They should have, would have, could have, did not beat Western because of a bomb in the last minute from midfield. They would have, could have, should have beaten Laurier, the other 7-0 team in Ontario. but a field goal went wide on the last play of the game, and they lost by a point. So, they've shown some really good things. They've been running the ball well of late, but, they lost that game, and I thought badly, to Windsor 3 weeks ago. They've won the 3 since. I didn't think their win over Guelph was that impressive because it was a touchdown win over a team that, lost to Waterloo the week before. So there are some things I really like about Queens. I don't know if they're Laval yet, but boy, Laval, is there reason for concern there?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to say given that I'm literally wearing the lapel pin of the tricolor on my jacket right now. But yeah, I do believe that five feels pretty high for Queens at this point in time. And I agree with basically every point Mike made. The challenging duality with Queens is, well, they haven't lost to anybody other than good teams, but they haven't beat anybody other than not good teams. So it's tough to really get a feel for the true talent level of this team because, as Mike mentioned, there's all the woulda, coulda, shouldas. The one guy I will say, though, that is definitely fitting in the top 5 in the country, Jared Cesare. Guys, if you haven't been paying attention to this guy, he's been on a heater the past 3 weeks. 786 rushing yards in the past 3 games for Jared Cesare. Now, the question with Queens on offense is, can they supplement that effectively enough through the air? Because the challenge in Canadian football is you can't just be a running team. You can be a run-heavy team, but you have to be able to supplement that with the air attack. It's been hit or miss for Queens this year. That's the real question for them on the offensive side of the ball, but Cesare is definitely doing his part.
Okay, we'll take you out with this. Maya Turner, you remember her, the first female to score a point in U Sports football. Here she is. She's got range from 48 yards out. And Manitoba wins over Regina. We'll be back in a second. Welcome back, everyone. We told you we'd be talking more about Elic Ayomanor and his great game, but we want to compare it against great Canadian games because there have been some fantastic single game performances by Canadians in the NCAA over the years. And Mike, where do you want to start off when you jump back in the time machine?
Oh boy, to me this is actually pretty easy, and it's Shimanga Biakabatuka. Touchdown Tim Biakabatuka with Michigan. They played a rivalry game, end of the season against Ohio State, and he lit it up. And the more he got the ball, the better he got. And you thought, okay, he's got 20 carriers, going to take the 20 carries, it's been productive, they're going to take their foot off the gas. 20 became 25, became 30, became 35, became 37 carries for 317 yards. And just amazing. It was just because it was such a big game. I think Ohio State was undefeated at that point of the season. It was a huge game, huge rivalry game, and boy, did he ever step into the spotlight. And, for all of the great games the Canadians have had, Tim Biakabatuka's against OSU was just for me.
I immediately thought back to the magical 2019 season that Chuba Hubbard had that obviously we covered extensively on this program. And the thing with that season was there were a couple games that are in the same conversation. He went over 250 against Tulsa in non-conference, but that was Tulsa. So you took it with a grain of salt. But then a couple weeks later, he went for 292 against Kansas State, including, I think, the play that was his, where, they say that you have a Heisman moment whenever you win it. Well, I guess it was his Cornish moment because it was the play where he ripped off an 84-yard house call and he just blew by everybody on the field. And that was when you were like, okay, we really need to start paying attention to this guy. And then later in the season, I think he was actually maybe even better when they played TCU later in the season. He ripped off 2 lengthy touchdown runs, one of 90 yards and another of 62 as he went for, I think, 284 total in that game. And he was just he was the entire reason they won that game. And so those two games really stood out for me because it highlighted, like, this guy's probably the most explosive player in college football right now. He's the guy everybody needs to be talking about, and he's one of ours.
The best college player I can remember that came from Canada is Tony Mandrich. And it's kind of difficult to quantify offensive linemen, but I found a stat from a Sports Illustrated article about a game he had against, again, Ohio State. So it's a Big Ten rivalry game. He played for Michigan State. He had 10 pancake blocks. He had 4 what they called OTF blocks, which was off the film, where he was able to block his defensive player out of the screen, so he couldn't see him anymore. He just took him so far downfield. And he had 3 NM blocks. What's an NM block? That's no moss. The old reference to Roberto Duran, where he quit in a fight with Sugar Ray Leonard and went, no moss, as he was walking off, no more. That's a block where the defender just simply quits. So in one game, he had the 10-4-3. That's astonishing, but that's how good Tony Mandrich was.
Yeah, it sounds like peak Tony Mandrich was basically a natural disaster waiting to happen. Like, he was incredible. Another guy I think of who's in that conversation from the glory days when I was merely a twinkle in my father's eye and you guys still had hair color was Ruben Mays. He goes off 1984, Washington State. He plays against Oregon, goes off for still a Canadian national record, 357 rushing yards in that game. He was absolutely incredible, at least according to the grainy highlights that I've seen of that game. But that was the one who was the benchmark that set the table for guys like Tim Biakabatuka and Chuba Hubbard a decade later. So that was another game that immediately came to mind.
Well, we all pull for Canadian athletes, and we will have an opportunity to pull for Canadian football players, both the men's and the women's team, at LA 28 with flag football being passed into the Olympic program for the LA 28 Olympic Games. And I tell you what, as president of Football Canada and general secretary of IFAF, we couldn't be prouder after all the work we've put in behind the scenes to make this a reality. Now that it's here and now that it feels real, how does this change things for the game of football? I'm going to go to the coach first and the broadcaster second. Gord?
Well, I think it legitimizes flag as just another version of football, right? And kind of akin, the immediate comparison I make is rugby sevens, right? And there's a lot of parallels there in that for similar reasons as to why flag football is the version of football going to the Olympics, rugby sevens was the version of rugby that went to the Olympics. You know, the logistics just made a lot more sense. The viewpoint in rugby circles with rugby sevens, at least in recent years, has become that rugby sevens is a viable alternative to 15s. It is a game that has a slightly different nature to it, but still has everything about the sport that we love, and in some cases enhances some of the aspects of it that we really do love. And in the proliferation of spread offenses in the tackle game, as much as I dearly love the full contact game, flag is going to be a great showcase for the sport. I'm incredibly happy that we're getting this version of the game into the Olympics because I think it showcases a more fan-friendly, a more kind of casual fan-friendly version of the sport that can maybe be, the gateway drug to get people into our professional leagues here in North America and maybe help spread the game even more globally.
I'm going to go at it not from a broadcaster, but from an employee of a CFL team. And one thing that I think we battle with the sport of football is a lot of people are intimidated by it because they never played it, because they don't know the lexicon, because they've never really experienced it. This opens up a lot of doors because it gives a goal for those who don't want to get involved with the physical side of the contact version of the sport. But flag football opens all kinds of doors, and it also allows younger athletes who don't necessarily want to play contact football, men and women, boys and girls, the opportunity to play the sport. And I did an article for our website with Argonauts.ca a couple of years ago highlighting families who are football fans and Argo diehards. And one was a story about a woman who was just starting university, was playing flag football with her mom, very high competitive flag football. And I asked her, how much did you feel more at home watching Argo football after you had played the sport? And she said, it just absolutely opened my eyes and I understand the sport so much better now. And if we can use flag football as a gateway to becoming more of a football fan at the U Sports level, at the junior football level, at the CFL level, at the NFL level, that's nothing but good things for everybody involved in our sport. So when I heard the news that this was going ahead, it was just this giant, oh, what a showcase for our game.
And it's worth noting the NFL is already laying the groundwork for that connection. Last year's Pro Bowl was the first with the new format where the Pro Bowl essentially became a flag football tournament. And I know that the Pro Bowl is a much derided event but in a lot of circles, but I watched a bit of that and it was fantastic. I'm really hopeful the CFL finds a way to do their own version of that as well to reinforce the connection between the two of them, because it's a lot of fun watching the guys who do strap on the pads take them off and have a little fun with it and emphasize the speed a little bit more like the NFL did with the Pro Bowl.
And it's the games of the week, and they are coming up next. High school football. That's right. We're going to preview some high school football from the Johnny Bright Sports Park in Edmonton. On Friday night, Austin O'Brien takes on Jasper Place. And at 7:30, Bev Facey tangles with Ross Shepherd. If you got a high school game you want to promote, let us know. We'll throw it up on the old KGN for you. So, college games of the week. What have you got for me, Gord?
Well, I think we got to be watching the follow-up for Elic Ayomanor's performance and to see if he can do it again. And so I'll talk about a classic Big Ten ACC matchup with UCLA going up to Palo Alto to play Stanford. And the reality for Stanford is this: that win, that huge comeback victory in Boulder over Colorado last weekend was awesome for them. And then you look ahead at their upcoming schedule and you're like, it may have just peaked here, because they host UCLA, who's in the top 25, just barely, but in the top 25. They then host Washington. They then go to Washington State. They then go to Oregon State. They then get a little bit of a breather, although it's a plucky Cal team that they get to host after that. And then they host Notre Dame. They have one non-top 25 opponent left on their schedule. It is going to be really tough for them. Now, that being said, UCLA has been very mercurial this year. They had a great win against Washington State 2 weekends ago, and they followed that up with laying a bit of an egg against Oregon State last weekend, where they lost by 12, but it really probably wasn't as close as that. So their offense with freshman Dante Moore has really been struggling to string points together. Their defense has been good for the most part, though Oregon State kind of picked them apart last week. So there is a possibility for Stanford to make some noise here, but they need to play off of that second half and overtime performance and take it again to the next level if they want to back that up here.
Let's go power on power right now. And number 3 versus number 6, Ohio State hosts Penn State. And maybe a guy we haven't given enough love to, and again, we want to see these guys thrive, is Theo Johnson out of Windsor. And he's with Penn State, and he's such a big body. And, he had a couple of touchdowns last week in the UMass massacre. But it wasn't just that game. He had his best game of the year in terms of catches. He had 6 against Iowa, and that's a pretty good football team. If they can find a way to use him more, because he's 6'6" and just has a massive frame, if they get the right matchup and they're up against a dime defense, good luck for even a 6'1", 200-pound defender if he gets posted up by that guy. He's a weapon, and I don't know why Penn State, or they should be able to find a way to use him a little bit better and a little bit more, because man, he's got a body that you just can't cover.
Well, and you got to pay attention to that game for Penn State's perspective, because Ohio State's been that mountain that they just have not been able to climb in the James Franklin era. It's looked for a number of years in a row now like they're building a ton of momentum, and then they hit Ohio State and they run smack into a brick wall and they never quite fully recover from it. So this is their chance again this year to finally get over that mountain. On the northern side of the border, there's not a ton of compelling matchups. It just is a bit of an off week for that. But one that I am keeping an eye on is in the last week of the OUA regular season is Ottawa and Queens. Both of these teams have locked up a playoff spot at this point in time. They're both sitting at 4-3 coming in. So this is essentially for seeding, and it may end up being a rematch between the two of them in the first round of the playoffs potentially. So there's quite a bit on the line here, and there's some interesting storylines on both sides. Jared Cesare I already talked about with Queens. On the Ottawa side, Josh Jansen from Chilliwack, BC has stepped in and filled the shoes of Ben Miracle pretty admirably over the last couple weeks. It's obviously his first time starting, and you can see the momentum picking up with each effort from Josh Jansen. If he can continue to move the sticks consistently and protect the ball, I do like how Ottawa has looked the last couple of weeks. But there's a lot on the line here, especially with that potential rematch looming, so I'll be watching that one.
Isn't it funny how Jansen has basically mirrored Miracle? When Ben came in, it was, as an injury replacement early in the season, and he continued to get better as the season went along, and now Jansen's doing exactly the same thing with Ben on the shelf. I wanted to keep in the OUA and talk about, a game that the schedule makers couldn't have been better with this one. Laurier at Western, 7-0, potentially for home field in the Yates Cup. Laurier's been great. We talked earlier on about Elgersma and his chances of potentially, being the Crichton winner, or at least being a finalist for it, which I think he's got that at least, in his back pocket at this point. But, this is a team that can move the football. Surprisingly, put up 40 on Windsor. I was really surprised to see that final score. Not so surprised that they won, just the way that they did. And now Western is a team that put up 66 points against, albeit a U of T team, but we knocked them out of first place on the Power 7, even though all they do is continue to win. And they're getting great quarterback play. They've got deep threats. They can run the football. And that offensive line machine, you can see Western every week. They may start out slowly, but by the time they get to the fourth quarter, they're rolling. So that's a huge game. And it's interesting to say that maybe we're selling Western short, but maybe we're selling Western short.
So for everyone here on Krown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullins saying it's the perfect time of the year to go, and let's get out to the game.